bank's polished marble gleamed with a cold promise, daring anyone who didn't fit to try their luck. And there he was, a black man in plain clothes clutching a folder they wouldn't bother to open. Judged before a single word left his mouth, they saw a nuisance, an outsider with delusions of grandeur, not the architect of a billion-dollar vision that could shatter their tidy little hierarchy. And as they smirked behind desks and offered petty scraps to buy his silence, they had no idea they were handing him the very proof he'd need to burn their reputation to ash. If you're ready to uncover how the arrogance of gatekeepers turns into their own undoing, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment about what you think is coming next and where you're watching from. I can't wait to hear your take on this brewing storm. Solomon Vance pushed open the shining glass doors of First Sovereign Bank and felt the hush of power swallow him. Polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of chandeliers overhead. Brass letters on the wall gleamed, a monument to wealth. He hesitated for a breath, adjusting the battered manila folder under his arm, the edges worn soft from months of revisions. He wore old gray slacks, faded and sagging at the knees, a pale blue button-down shirt with a frayed collar, and scuffed brown loafers whose soles threatened to peel. He tried to stand a little straighter, brushing invisible lint from his sleeve. Inside the folder lay his life's work. Projections, blueprints, signed letters of support from state engineers and city planners, a full $6.1 billion development proposal that he'd poured 3 years into perfecting. He inhaled slowly, willing his heart to slow its pounding, and stepped toward the reception desk. Behind it sat Tara, a young woman with her hair in a neat bun, focused on her computer screen. She didn't look up. "Good morning," Solomon said, voice catching just slightly. She glanced up, expression flicking over his clothes, the battered folder, before she let her mouth twitch into a customer service smile that seemed stuck halfway. "Yes?" she asked in a tone that managed both boredom and warning. Solomon shifted the folder in his arms. "I have an appointment with Mr. Caro. 10 o'clock. She sighed and turned slowly to her monitor. "Name: Solomon Vance." She typed lazily, the sound of nails clacking. She paused, eyes narrowing slightly as she read. Then she picked up the receiver and angled her body away from him. "Mr. Caro? I have a Solomon Vance here. Says he has an appointment." There was a pause. She listened, rolling her eyes so slightly Solomon almost missed it. "Yes. Okay. I'll let him know." She set the phone back in its cradle with exaggerated care, turned back with a thin-lipped, mechanical smile. "He's with someone. It might be a while. Please have a seat." Solomon swallowed and nodded. "Of course." He turned and walked toward the line of heavy leather chairs against the wall. He chose one on the end, carefully sat, and placed the folder in his lap. He rested both hands on it, thumbs tapping gently. The clock over the entrance seemed to tick too slowly. Minutes crawled. Tara didn't look at him again. She busied herself with the computer, clicking around, laughing once at a text on her phone. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Solomon tried to keep his breathing calm, wiped his damp palms on his slacks, and looked around. The bank was designed to make people feel small if they didn't belong. The ceilings soared overhead, lit with expensive chandeliers. The counters were gleaming marble, the doors brushed steel and glass that revealed but also excluded. 25 minutes. He shifted in his seat. A man entered in a charcoal gray suit with a pale blue tie, and Tara's entire posture transformed. She sat straighter and smiled genuinely. "Mr. Fields, welcome. He's ready for you." Fields didn't look at Solomon as he passed. Solomon watched the door close behind him and tried not to let his shoulders slump. Another 15 minutes. A woman with platinum blonde hair in a tight bun and a perfect white pantsuit entered next. Tara was on her feet before she even spoke. "Ms. Lefebvre, right this way." No question of her name. No making her wait. Solomon swallowed again. He glanced at the clock. 45 minutes. The receptionist didn't meet his eyes. When he tried to shift in the seat to catch her gaze, she turned away, shuffling papers that didn't need organizing. Another man came in, older, silver-haired, wearing a navy pinstripe suit that glowed under the chandeliers. She greeted him with a laugh, calling him Mr. Benson, before he even introduced himself. She shook his hand across the counter. "He'll see you immediately." Solomon's heart thudded painfully in his chest. 60 minutes. He adjusted the folder again. The label was curling up from the edge. He pressed it down carefully. Sweat dampened the back of his shirt, sticking it to the vinyl of the chair. Staff behind the glass windows stole glances at him, then whispered and smirked. He heard one say too loudly, "Is he still here? God." Another chuckled and said, "Probably lost. Can't read the sign." A security guard by the door watched him like he was waiting for trouble. Solomon tried to calm his breathing, tapping his thumb against the folder in time with the clock's second hand. 72 minutes. Tara finally picked up the phone again, dialing slowly. He tried to clear his throat gently, but even that tiny sound seemed to echo in the cavernous room, which was decorated with framed photos of Corbin shaking hands with politicians and grinning in front of ribbon cuttings. Corbin finally set down the papers with a sigh of heavy annoyance and looked at Ellis like a school principal staring at a truant kid. "Monroe, right?" he said flatly. Ellis nodded once, swallowing. "Yes, sir. Thank you for seeing me. I have the details here." He nudged the folder forward an inch, inviting Corbin to take it. Corbin didn't move. Instead, he cocked his head, squinting at Ellis's rumpled shirt, the sweat on his brow, the fraying seam of his pants leg. A smirk curled one corner of his mouth. "You want this branch to fund you?" he said slowly, as if testing the words for absurdity. "You realize this isn't a credit union for hustlers, right?" Ellis blinked. The word hit him like a slap. He felt his mouth open and close once before he managed to speak. "Sir, I assure you, this is a serious plan. Fully documented. Government support. I have letters of intent in there." He patted the folder lightly, voice shaking. Corbin snorted, a sound ugly and dismissive, like he was clearing something foul from his nose. "Government support," he repeated with theatrical disbelief. He leaned forward just enough to rest his elbows on the desk and steeple his fingers. "Tell me, Mr. Monroe, how many zeros did you accidentally type here? $6 billion? That's cute. Really, maybe you meant 6 million or 6,000. He barked a short, humorless laugh at his own joke. Ellis felt heat crawling up his neck. He forced himself to breathe evenly, but his fingers dug into his knees under the desk. He tried again, voice quiet but urgent. "Sir, please, if you just look at the contents, you'll see the projections are realistic. The bid is approved at the state level. This isn't speculative. I know the figure is large, but the plan is fully vetted." He couldn't keep the slight tremble out of his words. Corbin didn't reach for the folder. Instead, with excruciating slowness, he dragged it an inch closer with one finger, flipped it open with deliberate disdain, and flicked through the first page without reading the words. He snapped it shut and pushed it back with a single contemptuous shove. "I don't need to read your hustle pitch," he said, voice rising. "We're not in the business of handing out monopoly money because someone thinks they're the next Rockefeller." He glanced toward the open door of his office, where the assistant outside was pretending not to listen, but very obviously was. Corbin raised his voice so it carried. "Maybe try the payday lenders across town. They specialize in your kind of dream." Ellis felt the breath leave his lungs. He sat frozen, blinking. His vision blurred slightly, and for a second he feared he might actually cry in front of this man. He clenched his jaw instead, willing the tears to retreat. He looked down at the folder as if it had betrayed him. Corbin let the silence stretch again, then sighed theatrically, making a show of checking his watch. "Look, I'm busy today," he said with mock regret. "Why don't we save us both some time? You pick up your little project here and go try someone more flexible. We do real business here." He gave Ellis a wide, false smile that showed all his perfect teeth, but no warmth at all. Ellis didn't move at first. His mind was screaming to get up, to leave, but his body felt cemented to the chair. Finally, with robotic movements, he picked up the folder, finger stiff, and pulled it back to his lap. Corbin cocked his head, eyes narrowing. "That's right," he said, softer but somehow more cruel. "Take it. You wouldn't want to leave that behind. Not when it's worth so much." Ellis squeezed the folder so hard the edge bit into his palm. He forced himself to his feet, knees weak, and cleared his throat one last time. "Tara." His voice cracked like a whip, and she startled visibly at her desk. "Yes, Mr. Shaw," she answered, trying to sound unruffled but failing. Corbin's eyes never left Ellis, as he drawled loudly enough for every corner of the marble lobby to hear. "Do me a favor. Bring Mr. Moreau here an appropriate loan application. One for $10,000. He drew out the words with theatrical contempt. "He says he needs $6 billion, but let's help him be realistic." Ellis felt the blood drain from his face, heat flooding back immediately as mortification took over. He swallowed hard, his mouth dry as sand. "Sir, please," he tried to say, but the words came out hoarse and cracked. Corbin continued as if Ellis hadn't spoken at all, voice rising so that everyone in the bank could hear, his tone dripping with feigned generosity. "You know, something to help with his landscaping business, or maybe to buy a new lawnmower." His grin widened into something savage. "I mean, let's keep it within reason for our local entrepreneurs." There was a ripple of laughter from the waiting area, uncomfortable but real. Ellis's eyes darted sideways to see an older woman in a pearl necklace lean in to her friend and whisper with a snort, "Delusional." The friend covered her mouth, giggling. Two suited men waiting at the loan desk didn't even bother to hide their amusement, one of them chuckling under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. Tara looked frozen, cheeks red with embarrassment at having to participate, but she obeyed, rifling through a drawer with jerky movements and producing a thin, brightly colored form that read Small Business Quick Loan, up to $10,000. She stood, hesitated, then walked over and held it out toward Ellis with a pained look that pleaded for forgiveness. He knew she wasn't brave enough to offer aloud. Ellis stared at the paper, his vision blurring. He didn't take it. His fingers tightened on the folder he'd carried like a shield, and the room seemed to tilt around him as shame crashed over him in suffocating waves. Corbin tapped a pen against the desk in mock encouragement. "Come on now," he called, voice sing-song mocking. "Don't be shy. You said you had a plan. Let's help you get something you can actually manage. 10,000's generous for someone who walked in off the street." He looked around at the watching customers, inviting them into the joke. "We're community-minded, after all." A thin ripple of laughter passed through the space again, sharper this time, more confident. Ellis's face burned hot enough he thought he might actually faint. He heard his own blood in his ears, a roar that drowned out the ambient noises of the bank, but did nothing to shield him from humiliating words that still seemed to echo off the high marble walls. He tried once more to speak, but no sound came out. His mouth worked uselessly, and the tears threatened. He forced them back with sheer will, refusing to give them this final triumph. Corbin's eyes flickered with satisfaction as he watched the struggle. He forced one step forward, then another, until he was almost at the front door, but something in him bucked. His mind raced with all the reasons he shouldn't cause a scene, but the memory of Corbin's sneer, of the laughter that had rippled through the lobby like poison, snapped something. He stopped dead in his tracks and turned, shoulders squared though they shook. His voice cracked with restrained fury. "I want to speak to your supervisor," he said, louder than he meant to, voice carrying over the hush that fell as heads turned. Corbin's expression didn't falter. He didn't stand. He simply leaned back in his oversized chair, folding his arms over his tailored suit, eyebrows raised in mocking surprise. "I'm sorry," he drawled, voice slow and condescending. "What was that?" Ellis licked his dry lips, fingers drumming against the manila folder, as if it were a bomb he was afraid to drop. "Your supervisor," he repeated, voice stronger this time, the anger giving him fuel he thought burned out. "I want to speak to whoever is in charge of you." For a heartbeat, the room was still except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Then Corbin's lips curled. He let out a single bark of laughter, sharp and cutting. "My supervisor," he said, as if tasting the words. He shifted forward, pressing a button beneath his desk with theatrical precision. "Security." His voice turned cold, professional, a predator playing with its prey. "We have a gentleman here who's refusing to leave. He's becoming agitated. Please come assist." Ellis blinked, the word agitated, ringing in his ears with all its loaded meaning. He felt eyes on him from every angle, the staff stiffening, customers leaning back slightly, as if physical danger had just walked in wearing his face. He held the folder to his chest like armor, shaking his head in disbelief. Agitated, he whispered, "I just want to talk to someone who'll listen." Corbin pretended to consider this, tapping his pen against the glossy desktop, then leaned back again with a small, satisfied smile. "This is listening, Mr. Monroe. And what I'm hearing is you're done here." The double doors to the lobby swung open, and a uniformed security guard stepped in, a big man with tired eyes, clearly used to this routine. He looked at Corbin first, then at Ellis, sizing up the situation in a heartbeat. Corbin gestured lazily. "Please escort this gentleman outside. He's disturbing the peace." The guard walked up to Ellis carefully, hands open and non-threatening but firm. "Sir," he said in a low voice meant to calm, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Ellis felt like his limbs were made of concrete, his heart a hammer trying to escape his ribs. He looked desperately at the guard, at Tara behind the desk whose eyes darted away in shame, at the customers who pretended to be fascinated by the floor or the artwork on the walls. No one moved to help him. No one spoke up. His throat tightened painfully. He tried one last time, voice thin. "Please, just let me explain. This is real. It's all real." The guard gave him a sympathetic look that twisted the knife even deeper. "I'm sorry, sir. Let's go." His hand was large and heavy on Ellis's shoulder, firm but not rough, guiding him backward toward the door as Ellis's shoes scraped against the marble. Corbin watched the entire scene with the delighted attention of a cat toying with a wounded mouse. As the guard turned Ellis toward the door, Corbin's voice rang out, loud enough for everyone to hear, oily with disdain. "Come back when you're wearing a real suit, Monroe." When he got home to his small studio apartment, he didn't bother turning on the light. He set the folder on the table, so carefully it was almost reverent, then sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. He stayed there for hours, the city outside shifting from afternoon to dusk to night without a moving, every tick of the old clock on the wall driving the failure deeper into his ribs. But as the night wore on, the shame cooled into something sharper. He wouldn't let it end like that. He couldn't. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let Corbin Shaw's smug dismissal be the final word. He stood suddenly, knees cracking, and powered on his ancient laptop. The fan whirred like a jet about to take off. He opened his documents, scrolled through the polished proposal, the signed letters of support, the financial projections so carefully modeled that even the State Review Board had signed off. It was real. It was solid. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't some hustler trying to scam a bank. He told himself that over and over. He logged onto First Sovereign's online portal. The login page gleamed with false promises of community partnership and empowering entrepreneurs. He clicked apply, filled in every field with shaking fingers, uploaded every document again, double-checking them all. When he hit submit, he sat back, exhaling, feeling a tremor of hope flicker to life. It died less than a minute later when the rejection flashed on screen. Application denied, potential fraud detected. He stared at the message, unblinking. He scrolled to see the details. A note, client flagged for threatening conduct. Account restricted pending review. His stomach turned to ice. He clicked for support, tried to chat with a representative, but the response was instant. Your account has been locked due to security concerns. He slammed the lid shut, hands shaking so badly he had to press them against his thighs to still them. He felt bile rise in his throat and swallowed it down hard. He rocked in his chair, telling himself it wasn't over, that there were other banks, other chances. He had the documents. He had the plan. He'd try another bank tomorrow. He'd dress better, speak calmer, do whatever they needed. They couldn't all be like Corbin, could they? Meanwhile, Corbin Shaw sat in his office, the lights dimmed for the evening, rolling the stress from his neck with practiced ease. He picked up the phone, dialing a number for memory. Reed? Yeah, it's Corbin. Listen, heads up. You might get a visit from a guy named Ellis Monroe. Says he's got some big development project. $6 billion. I'm telling you now, don't waste your time. Total nonsense. He nearly caused a scene here today. Threatened staff. The guy's unstable. He paused to let the lie settle, smiling to himself. Yeah, that's right. Just wanted you to know. No point in him wasting your day too. He listened to the agreeing grunt on the other end, then hung up and sat back, feeling the day's tension drain away. This was how you protected the bank. Filtered out the trash. Made sure the place kept its reputation. He glanced at his polished shoes on the edge of the desk and smiled. Back in his apartment, Ellis sat in the dark, the glow from the streetlights casting long bars of orange through his blinds. He forced himself to imagine the meeting going differently. He pictured Corbin Shaw leaning forward in interest, studying the numbers, nodding along with genuine curiosity. The fantasy hurt more than it helped. By morning he hadn't slept at all, but he still sent one last desperate text to Clara Beecham, his partner and co-author of the proposal, begging for help. Clara lived in the suburbs and worked in corporate real estate, and she was used to dealing with banks. She agreed immediately, promising she'd go to the same branch and present the exact same plan. "We'll see what they say to me," she wrote, adding a wry smiley she probably meant to sound reassuring. Ellis sat at his table long after she confirmed her appointment, trying to breathe through the sharp anxiety that wouldn't leave his chest. When she arrived at the bank that afternoon, she walked in with her usual grace, her sleek navy skirt suit pressed to perfection, her hair pinned in a smooth French twist, her heels clicking with authority. She carried the same folder Ellis had handed her that morning, carefully reorganized, freshly smoothed out, but unchanged in content. The lobby looked exactly as Ellis remembered: polished floors, cool lighting, pretentious artwork on the walls. Tara greeted her with bright politeness, immediately asking, "How can I help you today?" Clara smiled warmly and said, "I have an appointment with Mr. Shaw." Tara didn't hesitate. "Of course. He'll be right with you. Please have a seat." Clara settled gracefully into one of the leather chairs without anyone watching her like a threat or a stain. She waited less than 5 minutes before Tara returned with a smile that looked genuine. "He's ready for you now." When Clara walked into the office, Corbin Shaw stood to greet her, extending his hand across the desk with a politician's smile. "Ms. Beecham, what an absolute pleasure. Come in. Sit." He waved her to the comfortable chair opposite his and sat down himself, folding his hands like an eager mentor. Clara laid the folder neatly in front of him and said in her clear, confident voice, "I'd like to go over a development proposal with you. It's for a $6.1 billion infrastructure project, backed by state approvals and private investment commitments." Corbin's eyebrows rose, but this time there was no mockery in the gesture. Instead, his eyes lit up. He leaned forward, fingers drumming with visible interest. $6 billion, you say? That's substantial. Very ambitious. But that's what we like to see here. He opened the folder and flipped through the documents with exaggerated care, nodding at the crisp pages, murmuring, "Excellent, excellent," as if each line confirmed something he already believed. Clara watched him with a carefully controlled expression, taking mental notes of every approving sound he made, every time he smiled. He paused over the projections and let out an appreciative whistle. "This is extremely thorough," he said, tapping the page with a manicured finger. "Honestly, Ms. Beecham, this is precisely the sort of visionary project our branch prides itself on supporting. The kind of thing our leadership wants to see more of. You're the kind of client we want." Clara didn't smile. Instead, she sat perfectly still and said evenly, "That's good to hear. Because I'm not the lead on this project. Ellis Monroe is." Corbin's fingers stopped tapping. His entire face froze for a single telling second. The smile cracked like a dropped plate. "I'm sorry," he said, voice too tight. Clara didn't blink. "Ellis Monroe, he's my partner. He developed this proposal. He designed the financial models. He's the CEO of the firm that's managing the bid. I'm here on his behalf today because he was refused a meeting. Here, with you." The silence in the office turned electric, thick enough to choke on. Corbin sat back slowly, the polite warmth draining from his face like blood from a corpse. When she was finished, Clara didn't say anything else. She just rested her hand on top of his for a long moment, the silence between them heavy with shared rage and something that felt like grief. The next morning Ellis woke before dawn, dressed in the same old slacks and shirt he'd worn to the first meeting, but ironed them with meticulous care, as if the press of heat could burn out the humiliation still clinging to the fibers. He didn't bother eating. He checked the contents of the folder a dozen times, making sure the signatures were visible, the approvals clean and unambiguous. He printed the emails from the state engineers again for good measure, highlighting the parts that named his firm and the approval for the $6.1 billion funding partnership. Then he took a bus downtown, clutching the folder so hard his knuckles turned white, and walked up the steps of the corporate headquarters with sweat trickling down his spine despite the morning chill. When he entered the lobby, he expected the same dismissive glances, the same careful avoidance, but the receptionist smiled with professional politeness as soon as he gave his name. He noticed the flicker in her eyes as she took in his clothes, but she said nothing about them. Instead, she made a quick call, nodding briskly. "They'll see you now," she said, gesturing toward a sleek glass elevator. He rode it up in silence, watching the city drop away beneath him. The boardroom door opened onto a cavern of wood paneling and chrome, the city skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, so clean they seemed to erase the glass entirely. A massive table dominated the space, ringed by chairs filled with men and women in tailored suits whose expressions were tight with calculation. Ellis felt their eyes scrape over him the moment he entered, the clothes, the old folder, the sweat at his hairline. But he didn't flinch. He walked to the head of the table and stood, folder in both hands. For a moment no one spoke. Then the man at the far end, some executive whose name Ellis hadn't even bothered to remember, cleared his throat. "Mr. Monroe, we're aware there was an incident at one of our branches." Ellis's jaw tensed. He opened the folder and began laying out documents like playing cards on the table in front of him. Letters of intent from state engineers, funding approvals, the detailed project plan with a $6.1 billion budget broken down line by line. The executive's voice faltered as he watched the stack grow. Ellis didn't look at him until the last page was placed. Then he raised his eyes. "Incident," he repeated quietly, voice like iron. "Your manager humiliated me, laughed in my face, called my proposal a hustle, refused to read a single page of this." He held up the final document between two fingers like a dagger. "The same plan he told my partner was brilliant." The room was silent except for the hiss of the climate system. One woman shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Ellis's voice didn't shake. "I am the CEO of the firm holding the top bid for this project. We're under final review for state-backed funding. I don't need you to like me. I need you to do your job." He paused to let that hang in the air. "But you made it clear what you think of people like me when we walk through your doors." He set the last page down with a snap. "So I'm here to make sure there's no confusion about what happens next." The executive at the far end cleared his throat again, voice now tight with forced calm. "Mr. Monroe, I assure you, this is not our standard practice. This branch manager's behavior." Ellis held up a hand and cut him off coldly. Don't insult me by pretending this is the first time it's happened. Don't lie to save your own face." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice until the words seemed to vibrate in the air. "I'm pulling all planned funding from this bank, every cent of it, and I'm making sure the state board sees exactly how you treat your partners." He tapped the stack of papers. "These are the receipts." Silence fell so heavy it seemed to crush the polished table. Out on the street, the city roared around him with the usual indifference of millions of lives that wouldn't pause for one man's private fight. But he didn't need them to pause. He needed them to see. The next morning, the first alert hit his phone before he even finished pouring his coffee into the chipped mug he'd owned since college. Someone had posted a blurry cell phone video online. At first, it was just local news bloggers picking it up, that moment in the lobby when Corbin Shaw had waved the $10,000 loan form at him and said in that dripping, mocking voice, "For your landscaping business or whatever hustle you're running." The words were clear as a bell on the recording, laughter audible in the background, and Ellis's own stunned, frozen silence just as obvious. By noon, national outlets were writing headlines in all caps. Bank manager mocks black CEO's $6.1 billion plan AS hustle. The video was everywhere. It ran on the evening news, played on car radios and traffic jams, circulated on every social feed he had ever created and many he hadn't. Comment sections seethed. Angry essays spread like wildfire. Other people came forward with their own quiet stories of being dismissed, of being offered payday lender rates, while whiter, richer-looking clients got the red carpet treatment. Hashtags trended. Local politicians weighed in. Ellis barely kept up with a flood of messages on his ancient phone, each ping a reminder that the world, at least this once, had seen exactly what had been done to him. He watched the clip himself exactly once. It made him sick to see his own face in that moment, humiliated and too shocked to answer. But he forced himself to watch it to the end so he would never forget what he was fighting. Meanwhile, Corbin Shaw's smug grin faded from the bank's website overnight. The corporate office issued a hasty, sterile statement about commitment to fairness and ongoing investigation that convinced no one. The local branch locked its social media pages. Staff who had laughed in the background of the video avoided cameras outside the bank doors, scurrying in with their heads down. Ellis received calls from local journalists begging for interviews, some apologizing for never having taken his calls before. He ignored most of them. He was too busy talking to Clara, who sat at his tiny kitchen table beside him in a blazer and jeans, her laptop open and her face lit by the glow of a dozen email tabs. She was answering inquiries from investors and state representatives who suddenly found their calendars clear for him. Ellis didn't gloat. He didn't have the energy for it. He spoke in short, precise sentences, explaining the plan over and over, sending PDF after PDF of the proposal to people who should have read it months ago. Then came the call he hadn't expected. The rival bank that Corbin had warned away picked up the phone. Ellis didn't recognize the number and almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. The voice on the other end was measured, cautious, but warm. "Mr. Monroe, I want to apologize. I want to start by saying we saw the video, and we saw your plan." Ellis didn't speak right away. He felt his fingers clench on the phone, so hard he thought it might break. The voice continued, sounding almost embarrassed. "We were wrong not to give you time before. We'd like to make it right. We'd like to offer you a meeting with our senior partners, as soon as you're willing. And frankly, better terms than you had before." Ellis sat back in his chair, the words sinking in like warm water on ice. He didn't trust it yet. He wouldn't trust easily again. But he heard Clara's sudden intake of breath beside him and knew she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. He forced himself to keep his voice steady. "Thank you," he said slowly. "I'll be in touch with my schedule." After he hung up, he let the phone fall onto the table and pressed his palms to his eyes, blocking out the light, the headlines, the past 3 days of relentless humiliation and rage. The words didn't make him smile, but they made something deep in his chest unclench for the first time in days. He read the official statement twice. The bank tried to spin it as decisive action, emphasizing a commitment to equitable service, but the truth was ugly and undeniable. They had fired Corbin Shaw in disgrace, the man's name now forever attached to a scandal that refused to die quietly. The news sites showed him leaving the branch for the last time, avoiding cameras, face twisted and pale, his once perfect suit rumpled and sagging under the weight of public hate. Ellis imagined for a moment the sound of that thick glass door slamming shut behind him with the finality of a cell door. There was no triumph in it, just justice. Meanwhile, shareholders, who had once boasted of their spotless brand image, went on the record demanding board resignations and new leadership. Video clips from the shareholders' meeting showed them red-faced, shouting about lost trust, ruined reputation, and a tanking stock price that reflected their failure to see this coming. They demanded explanations for the institutional failures that let a man like Corbin Shaw hold power unchecked, humiliating potential partners whose only crime was showing up in the wrong clothes and the wrong skin. The board responded with all the calm panic of people who suddenly realized they were in the crosshairs. They promised change. They promised investigations. They promised training and reforms. Ellis felt only grim satisfaction at their discomfort, knowing they weren't doing it out of goodness, but survival. Regulators, too, were forced to act. The state attorney general announced a full civil rights probe into discriminatory lending patterns at the bank, not just in that one branch, but across their entire system. Subpoenas flew. Analysts in suits went on TV predicting record fines. Class action lawyers held press conferences on courthouse steps, brandishing copies of the viral video as Exhibit A, calling for anyone who'd faced bias to join the lawsuit. Ellis watched them with his elbows on his knees, the manila folder resting on the floor between his feet like a tired old pet. It was battered beyond saving now, corners crushed, cover stained from sweat and rain, but he still kept it close. It wasn't a prop anymore. It was proof. He didn't celebrate as the bank's quarterly report dropped like a stone, dragging stock value with it. He didn't toast anything when journalists started publishing leaked emails of staff complaining about Corbin's casual bigotry, revealing it hadn't been a one-off mistake, but standard practice dressed in a suit. He didn't even blink when some of those staff scrambled to disavow their laughter in the lobby that day, insisting they had been uncomfortable. They hadn't really thought it was funny. They'd just gone along. He remembered every laugh, every whisper of delusional, every smirk. He remembered Tara at the front desk refusing to meet his eyes, handing over the $10,000 loan form like it was charity, her smile brittle and false. Now the news said she had resigned, unable to face the constant protests outside the branch, the threats to boycott any bank that kept her on staff. He didn't feel sorry for her, not even a little. Clara sat beside him most nights, reading the same news on her laptop, coordinating calls with lawyers and investors who smelled opportunity in the wreckage. They no longer needed to prove the plan was sound. Everyone could see now that it had been dismissed for reasons that had nothing to do with numbers. Every TV segment that replayed the video reminded the world exactly what had happened. A black man with a $6.1 billion proposal had been told to get a landscaping loan instead, laughed out the door, and flagged as a security threat for asking questions. Ellis replayed that moment in his head every time he doubted himself, forcing himself to remember the way Corbin had smirked while calling security, the humiliating scrape of his shoes on marble as he was forced out, the sound of muffled laughter chasing him to the sidewalk. He let that memory feed him, not with rage, but with fuel for something colder, more durable. He answered emails with careful precision. Months passed, and the firestorm that had consumed First Sovereign Bank left behind smoldering ruins and bitter lessons no PR firm could spin away. The headlines slowly faded, but the damage was permanent. Branches closed, executives replaced, and the brand name itself sold off for parts to salvage something from a wreckage. Regulators kept digging, class action suits multiplied, and no one forgot the video that started it all. The one of Corbin Shaw mocking Ellis Monroe's billion-dollar plan as a hustle for a landscaping loan. Yet Ellis didn't spend those months chasing revenge or basking in vindication. Instead, he worked. He finalized the deal with a rival bank who'd once turned him away, but now offered him the kind of partnership he deserved. He sat in conference rooms with lawyers and financiers who finally treated his words as law instead of noise. He didn't smile much, but he didn't apologize either. When the funding came through, he pushed every cent into the project he'd fought for, hiring teams, securing permits, sending dirt flying on sites where nothing had existed but abandoned lots and neglected streets. He didn't forget what it meant. This wasn't just for him. It was for the people who'd grown up seeing boarded-up stores, for the next kid who'd walk into a bank with a dream too big for his shoes. Clara stayed by his side, her crisp emails and sharp questions breaking apart every obstacle in their path. She never let him forget they'd won, but she also never let him forget how easily they could have lost if not for the proof, the video, the rage that refused to stay quiet. Meanwhile, Ellis took a small cut of the budget and poured it into something else entirely, a local nonprofit dedicated to teaching financial literacy and entrepreneurship in his old neighborhood. He didn't do it for press or clout. He did it because he'd seen what happened when a person walked into a bank without knowing the rules of the game. The center was nothing fancy. It had second-hand furniture, squeaky floors, and volunteers who showed up more out of hope than experience, but it was his. Every weekend he sat at the front of the class with the same battered folder, now laminated and worn at the edges, and taught anyone who'd listen how to turn their idea into something a bank would have no choice but to fund. He explained credit scores, projections, grant writing. He told them the truth about the system they'd have to fight. He didn't lie about how hard it was. He only promised it could be done. One rainy afternoon, he was finishing a session when the door creaked open and someone hesitated in the entrance. Ellis looked up from his notes to see a man he hadn't thought of in weeks, or maybe had thought of every day without admitting it. Corbin Shaw didn't look like the man from the bank videos. His tailored suits were gone, replaced by a wrinkled button-down that sagged around his thinning frame. His hair was unkempt, his eyes red-rimmed and heavy with something that looked a lot like shame. He hovered in the doorway, dripping water onto the warped linoleum, shifting from foot to foot like a boy called to the principal's office. The room went quiet as others noticed him. Ellis felt the room tilt, a hush falling that was thicker than any sound. Corbin didn't move closer, just cleared his throat and tried to speak. His voice cracked immediately. He swallowed and started again. "I heard you teach classes here," he said, barely above a whisper. I was wondering if you needed any help." The words seemed to land like stones in the quiet room. Ellis sat very still. He felt the weight of every insult, every moment of public shame, every laugh that had burned his ears as he was forced out of that marble lobby. He remembered the heat in his face as he held his tongue because he knew no one would defend him. He remembered that folder pressed against his chest like armor that hadn't saved him. He let the memory wash over him, but refused to drown in it. The volunteers and students watched, eyes darting between the two men, the air charged and waiting. Ellis studied Corbin's face carefully. The man didn't try to hide it, the lines of stress and ruin, the twitch of regret at the corner of his mouth, the dullness in his gaze that suggested he'd learned something ugly about himself too late to undo it, but maybe not too late to understand. Ellis set down the folder carefully and stood, letting the scrape of the chair legs break the silence. He picked up one of the volunteer badges from a basket by the door, held it out slowly, arm steady. His voice was level, quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. "If you're serious about changing," he said, each word deliberate, "start here." Corbin hesitated, eyes glistening. Then he stepped forward with trembling fingers and took the badge. Ellis watched him pin it to his chest with shaking hands. Around them, the room exhaled. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful narratives about justice, change, and human redemption, don't forget to like this post and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. I'd love to know what you think about Ellis's journey and Corbin's ultimate reckoning. Did the ending surprise you? Do you think everyone deserves a chance to change? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm especially curious where you're reading or watching from today. Let's talk about it.